What does your gut health have to do with that bloated feeling you've been having, maybe those breakouts or those mood swings you just can't shake? Well, turns out everything. I'm Dr. Alice Mina. Welcome to the Skin Reel. On this week's episode, I'm going to be exploring the fascinating connection between the skin, gut, and brain, and how our microbiome may be the hidden force behind radiant skin and our health. From fiber and fermented foods to the surprising impact of antibiotics, I am taking a deep dive into the gut microbiome with my colleague, Dr. Katrina Coulter. Dr. Coulter is a wife, physician, mom. She's a regenerative rancher. I think the first rancher I've had on the show. And she is an infectious disease physician, and she is on a mission to help educate people about the importance of our microbiome, not just for our gut health, but really for our whole body health. And yes, there is a connection between our gut and what we eat and the health of our gut, the bacteria, the microbes in our gut, and our skin health, believe it or not, which is so crazy and cool. If you are wondering if your gut is in optimal health, not just for your skin health, but for your body, you're definitely going to stick around. Dr. Coulter, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm so excited to have you on and to discuss the skin, gut, and brain connection, and especially the gut microbiome.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Mina. I'm honored to be on your podcast, and I think this is going to be a really fun conversation.
So I feel like the gut microbiome is really having its moment right now, right? I feel like even in med school for me, which was like, oh gosh, almost 20 years ago, this wasn't really something discussed. I mean, maybe it was discussed amongst like GI people, but I didn't really ever hear about it. And now we're hearing so much about it and the importance of it and prebiotics, postbiotics, all this stuff. So I'd love for you just to break down, what does the word microbiome even mean?
You're absolutely right. It really is having its day. It's really just been in the past 20 years that a lot of this research has just exploded. And so we are hearing a lot about it. The microbiome in general is the microbes. So the cells that are not made of us, the non-human cells that live on us and in us, and they help us function. We actually cannot live without them. So we're talking about trillions of cells, more microbes than actual human cells that we have. And it's bacteria, yeast, fungi, viruses, all kinds of different things that we're made up of, and that really play a crucial role in our health and our day-to-day functioning. And we're really just learning exactly how crucial and how big of a role the microbiome is playing. So when we say the gut microbiome, we're actually talking about inside our intestinal tract or inside our digestive tract, which is going to be basically an open tube from mouth to anus. But as you well know, we also have a skin microbiome, and these are all the microbes that live upon us.
I think it's astounding, right? Where people don't realize how much bacteria, viruses, fungi, all these things live on us and the skin as well. Trillions of microbes live on our skin. So we can see them sometimes when we do swabs of the skin or biopsies. You can actually see these little guys. And I think the concept of getting all of them off, cleaning them, like back in my day, I tried to like scrape in anything living on my skin off, thinking that was going to help give me nice skin, which actually it backfires. And we need these microbiomes in the right balance to have healthy skin. And we know with skin conditions, when the balance is out of whack and you have too much of one bacteria and not enough of another, that's where we see some of these inflammatory skin conditions like eczema, psoriasis, acne, rosacea starting to flare. So do you kind of see that with the gut microbiome, that when there are imbalances, we can see an uptick in inflammation or other problems?
We do. And it's not quite as obvious as it is on the skin, because the skin is this big organ that we're wearing on the outside. So we have direct visualization, where we don't necessarily have direct visualization of the GI tract unless a gastroenterologist is going down there with a scope. But they're very similar. The skin and the gut are very similar because if you think about it, they're both how we interact with the outside world. So the skin is in direct contact, but the digestive tract is an opening. And so we have kind of what's in our world going through. And we're lined on with epithelial cells on the skin, and the GI tract is also lined with epithelial cells and then covered in protective mechanisms like a layer of mucus, which could be kind of thought as similar to like sebum or some of the sweat that comes up on the skin as a protective measure. So we do experience inflammation in the GI tract as well. And that's kind of what we're really starting to understand is this inflammation and the effects that it's having on everything, including the skin, and may actually be playing a big role in that skin inflammation that's leading to acne and rosacea and atopic dermatitis and psoriasis and a lot of these skin conditions that we're seeing. There's a cardiologist named Stephen Gundry that's written a couple books, The Plant Paradox, and I'm forgetting the name of his other most recent book, but he talks about what is happening in the GI tract is manifesting on the skin. That's actually us seeing it on the skin. And so that's kind of an interesting way to think about it.
Exactly, because you might think, "Oh, gut inflammation, what does that mean?" Like, maybe diarrhea or constipation, but really, it actually affects other organ systems, and we know the skin being one of those, so very cool, and I think in the next, like, 10, 15, 20 years, we're gonna understand this even better than we do now. We're just kinda scratching the surface.
Oh, absolutely. We're in an infancy right now of understanding what's going on. And it's cool. We've got all this DNA sequencing, and we're really just learning even what's in there and starting to try to understand the balance of what's in there. And so, something that's really important is that stay a very diverse community. And the reason why we believe we're seeing so much inflammation is we're losing this diversity in that community. And there are a lot of reasons why we are losing diversity, but I feel that our food system is one of our biggest contributors to the loss of that diversity.
I'd love to go a little deeper on that. So, yeah, what is contributing to the changes? Like you said, food.
Yeah, yeah. So if you think of how we as humans ate about 100 years ago, about 80% or more of people were growing their own food from their land, involving animals and maintaining the land. And now it's less than 10% of people grow their own food. So we've industrialized our food system, and we've done this to make nutrition more available. And so there's been a benefit of it, but in the process, we've also really seen some downsides. And so our industrialized agricultural systems are really contributing to our loss of diversity in our colon. And we're doing that, one, by how we grow crops. So we grow crops now in monocultures. We use a lot of pesticides because when you grow all the same crop, it's easy for a plague of insects, the same insect, to come find that crop. And so we need pesticides. We also till the land. And so that causes a destruction of the soil microbes. And so then we need to add fertilizer to it. And so then that also further destroys the microbes in the soil. So really, we're killing our soil. And that soil is what dictates what's in our microbiome. So we're getting these microbes in through plants and vegetables. And as the biologic diversity is being depleted in the soil, we're seeing it in our intestines as well.
So, even a carrot or vegetables, like true produce that you would get at the grocery store, is not as nutritious as potentially what it was 100 years ago because of how it's grown.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the nutritional density of the produce is declining because of the loss of biodiversity in the soil. So it's kind of crazy.
You think you're doing the right things by shopping the perimeter of the grocery store, right? And getting all those fresh fruits and veggies, which is good, but it's disappointing to hear, shoot, it's not as nutritious as it used to be.
You're still doing the right thing shopping the periphery because that we can talk about what's in the middle of the grocery store, which really it may not even be food. So since the 70s, we've been eating what we call ultra processed foods. And so these are foods that have been heavily processed, and they have a lot of stabilizers and emulsifiers and sugar added to make them, of course, more tasty because we love sugar. But what we're taking out is the fiber. We're also changing our gut microbiome in that way because we're not eating as much fiber. And fiber is the prebiotic material that those gut bacteria really love and need. And so we're replacing whole foods with ultra processed foods and packages that live on the shelf. We're feeding animals in concentrated feeding operations antibiotics and unnatural diets. So their microbiomes are changing, and that's affecting us. And we're mass producing crops that are not as nutritious as they used to be. So lots and lots of changes over the past 100 years, and really even over the past 50 years. And we're starting to see the effects of it.
Yeah, gosh, that's kind of depressing. What are some foods that are good for our gut then?
Yeah, so I'm not a big fan of telling people what they can't eat because I love food and I love to eat. And so I like to focus on what should you get more of? What can you kind of add more of and push out all the bad stuff with? And so fiber, we need fiber. So traditionally humans probably ate about 100 grams of fiber a day. Now most people are getting 5 to 10 grams. The recommended amount is about 25 grams of fiber a day. So fiber's coming in the form of fruits, vegetables, nuts, whole grains. We need more of it. And then other types of foods that I'm really getting into, I think they're kind of fun and exciting, is fermented foods. And this has been a process of, you could think of as preparing or storing food that's been around for thousands of years, that humans probably originally used for safety purposes because you could make a food last a little longer by fermenting it, which is using a type of microbe to change the structure of the food. But now we're learning, wow, these fermented foods are really great for the microbiome.
Do you know why? What about being fermented?
Yeah, so one of the reasons is some of them do contain the live active bacteria or live yeast that adds into our microbiome, so the probiotics. But they also, to ferment them, you need the prebiotic, which is the fiber. So you get that as well. And then they have postbiotics in there. So these are terms you kind of brought up in the beginning, and we can get into the exact definitions here in a minute. But the postbiotic is the signaling molecules or the breakdown molecules of the microbes, and these tell our gut what to do. So either things like you should make more inflammation, or inflammation should calm down, or let's produce more of a neurotransmitter, or let's produce more gut cell wall lining for protection. So there's a wide variety of signaling molecules that are breakdown products of these good bacteria and yeast.
Oh, wow. So, fermented foods, do you have any favorites? Like you said, you're starting to experiment with this. And, I feel like I know kimchi and sauerkraut, but like, what are some options for people?
Yeah, those are good options. Yogurt is usually the most common one that people think of. Kombucha is really having its day and gaining popularity if you've seen that on the grocery store shelf. Some other good ones, so pickles. And so there's two different ways of making pickles. You can make them with vinegar, which is a fermented product. So you're still getting some of the postbiotic benefit. Or you can make them by an actual fermentation process where they're sitting on the counter. And so I've always loved that kind of sour, vinegary taste, and love pickles, pickled vegetables, things that taste like that. So for me, they're getting them in is easy. I realize some people really don't love that flavor.
I do try to eat yogurt with fruits and berries. So good. I'm doing that. And I like pickles. So maybe I need to start incorporating those a little bit more. Well, that's great to know. Are there any other foods you recommend? You said fiber, fermented foods, anything else?
I would say, again, not trying to tell people what they can't eat, but really trying to minimize ultra processed foods. If you look at the label on something and you do not recognize the words on there, it's an ultra processed food. It's probably not good for you. It's probably not good for your gut and has very little nutritional value.
I feel like a lot of the packaged food is processed, right? Because it's meant to be shelf stable and last a long time and convenient and all those things, but not necessarily the most nutritious.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to stay away from packages, but it's hard when you're a busy mom.
Yes, I hear you. For sure. Yeah. I mean, this is all just like information. You're not going to be perfect every day, but just to kind of like food for thought, right? To think about choices you're making.
Exactly. Exactly. Be aware of it. And maybe, instead of reaching for the packaged granola bar, reach for the apple instead, or stock your house with those things with the whole foods so that they're there and a good option.
Now, I would love a breakdown because I get confused on these. The prebiotics, the probiotics, and the postbiotics. And you kind of touched on a little bit, but can you just kind of break it down in real simple terms?
Yeah, yeah. So I think of prebiotics as the food that my microbiome wants to eat. So fiber and lots of different types of fiber. The more diverse types of fiber that you can get in your diet, the better. We hear a lot about things like asparagus, artichokes, chia seeds are great. Garlic and onions have a great amount of the prebiotic fiber. So things like that. Probiotics are the good microbes. So by definition, it's a microbial organism that conveys a benefit to the host. So the stuff you want in your gut, the good stuff.
That's actual microbe itself, the probiotics.
Correct. The living actual microbe. Postbiotic, in my mind, is just the breakdown product, the signaling molecule. And in some cases, it's even like the dead bacteria.
Very interesting. I know in skincare, people are starting to look at how can we incorporate this into skincare. And there are even some companies now starting to do that. It is tricky getting probiotics in skincare, right? Because they're living and not necessarily shelf stable, right? But yeah, we're definitely looking into also like cleansers and how do we clean the skin and take care of the skin without eliminating all the good bacteria that we want on the skin and keeping that in balance. So the gut, we're trying to do the same thing, right?
Exactly, exactly. And I'm glad you brought up the skincare products because I've started to see that on the market and I don't really know what to think about it. In my mind, I think, well, a probiotic is good, but is there really a benefit? Or is this just a marketing gimmick?
At least at this point, and again, I'm not like an expert on this, but I think it's still in its infancy, but I think we'll be seeing more of this. I know there is a company that is really trying to promote prebiotics in skincare for people with acne because we do know when there's over proliferation of a certain kind of C. acne bacteria that it flares and keeping that in balance. But I think what's also important that people don't really think about with our skin is antibiotic usage, right? And you, as an infectious disease doctor, can speak to this, but dermatologists actually write for more antibiotic prescriptions than any other medical specialty because we are using it so much for these inflammatory conditions, things like acne, rosacea. And sometimes, sure, we have to use it, but I am seeing a shift away from antibiotics because we're learning so much about how even and correct me if I'm wrong, like a week of being on an antibiotic can impair or impact your gut and your skin.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited to hear about that shift because I know that even growing up, that was kind of the traditional practice was to take antibiotics for severe acne. But yes, it does have a major impact taking an oral or an intravenous antibiotic on your gut health as well as your skin health. And one of the most common questions I get actually from my patients when I'm treating a life-threatening condition with antibiotics is, why is my skin so dry? Or why does my hair feel different? Or why do my nails feel so brittle? And so my patients really have taught me a lot about the changes that occur, not just to the gut, but actually to their skin health when we're treating them with systemic antibiotics. And of course, the GI side effects, if anybody listening has ever taken an antibiotic, likely has experienced some gastrointestinal side effects like diarrhea from being on that antibiotic. And those can be lasting. Different studies suggest different things, that maybe it's a 3-month period of time to recover. Some suggest it might take up to 2 years for the gut to recover. So really minimizing antibiotic use for when it's really needed and not just when you think you might be at risk for getting an infection, because every time you get a cold, it typically evolves into a sinus infection. Things like that are opportunities to maybe try different treatment options like nasal rinses or, for I treat a lot of chronic UTIs, and drinking water can actually decrease those by 50% and also make your skin beautiful and healthy, right?
That's right. Yeah, can't go wrong with some good water. Yeah, I think just also awareness and helping educate the public too, because I do a lot of surgery and people are really surprised that, oh, don't I get an antibiotic? Shouldn't I get an antibiotic? If they're used to getting an antibiotic when they have skin surgery. And there are some times that it is appropriate, but our data now shows that really there's no role except for a few instances to give someone antibiotics. But I think our culture is just very used to that you get an antibiotic with surgery. If something's red and warm, it must be infected, called to get an antibiotic, right? So I think it's also just training the public and everyone and doctors too, honestly, that not everything needs an antibiotic. And really that should be reserved for certain instances or when you know there is an infection.
Yes, and we talked about all these changes that have occurred that are leading to the loss of our diversity, and certainly the invention and use and then overuse of antibiotics is also a big contributor.
Absolutely. Now, we've kind of talked about diet, which makes sense, right, for the gut. But are there non diet or other lifestyle factors that can help our gut microbiome?
There are, and this is kind of a really fun area. But again, the research is really in its infancy. And so a lot of the studies are done in animal models, or there's just one or two studies done in humans with kind of very low numbers. But we are finding, in addition to diet and antibiotic use, that our sedentary lifestyle is affecting our gut microbiome. So there's a couple studies out there showing that the more we move, the more diverse our GI tract is. And, over the past 40 to 50 years, we have become the most sedentary that we have ever been as a species. I think that movie Wall-E was such a great example. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a cartoon, but it's all the people kind of lose the ability to walk because they're just sitting and looking at screens, and they become overweight and they can't really use their muscles and their limbs anymore. So us sitting in front of a computer all day is not helping our microbiome. There's some suggestion that exposure to artificial light, especially at nighttime, is affecting the microbiome, that not getting enough exposure to natural light because we're synthesizing vitamin D through our skin. And vitamin D levels definitely lead to loss of biodiversity in the microbiome. What else? Irregular sleep cycles. There's a connection between our circadian rhythms and the microbiome. Eating late at night, or our kind of longer eating periods. Lack of seasonal eating. We can eat whatever we want any time of year from anywhere on the planet. And that's not how we have evolved this microbiome. And then, of course, there's alcohol, and we are in a very pro alcohol society where we've normalized consuming alcohol at every gathering and sporting event and fundraiser, everything. And that's taking its toll as well.
Wow. So all those things. But you know what's interesting? All the things you mentioned are the things I talk about for healthy skin. And it's like, I think sometimes we're so focused on what's the hack, what's the vitality hack, longevity hack. And really, it's like, do these common sense, basic things to help your gut, your skin, like all our organs. It doesn't have to be these, esoteric hacks and kind of gimmicky things. It's like, move around, sleep, don't drink excessively, that are so important to all our organs, right? But I just feel like sometimes it's harder to hear that message because it's maybe seems too simple to actually work.
Or kind of overwhelming. We're in this society where we were go, go, go. We work all the time, and we've kind of normalized you're supposed to work really hard and then you retire and you can relax. And we're not really looking at the toll that's taking on our health in the process. I mean, most people dedicate their life to their career and then they get to retirement age and they don't last very long after that. And that's because they've kind of sacrificed their body, is in my opinion, at least. Kind of being aware of, hey, all these things that society tells us are normal, like sitting down and working an 8-hour day or longer in front of a computer screen, actually are not that healthy. Like, we need to get up and take a walk and go get a drink of water and go outside and breathe some fresh air and get a little sunlight and, eat a piece of fruit instead of that packaged whatever granola bar. But you're right, they are simple. And I think we are looking sometimes for a sophisticated or elaborate pill. And Western medicine is very, very much about kind of drilling down to exactly what is the problem and what is the single most thing that's out of balance. And then how do we give a medication to put that back in balance? And we're not always stepping back and looking at the big picture and the whole complex biological system. And that's what I feel like the microbiome is making us do, is say, hey, there's actually this really complicated system in there that kind of knows how to balance itself. And it will if you listen to it.
Right, exactly. Our bodies are so smart, right? People talk about doing cleanses and stuff like that. It's like with our skin, like your skin knows when to shed and exfoliate if you treat it well, unless there's a disease state. So if we treat our bodies well, they're so smart. They know what to do, but we have to nurture it and take care of it in order for that to happen. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the gut like one of the number one immune system that we have? Like it has just a robust immune surveillance?
It is. It is. And that's really, as an infectious disease physician, that's really what got my interest in the GI tract, was how it was affecting people's immunity and why are some people getting these infections and other people are not. And, then wanting to, of course, get to people before they got the infections and say, hey, if you make these changes now, then perhaps we can avoid this down the road. But yes, so our immune system goes into the GI tract to train. So our immune cells are produced in other organs and then they travel to the GI tract. And that's where they're exposed to all these different microbes. And these microbes, it's like boot camp. They teach them, what you need to react to and what should induce you to cause inflammation and what is normal. And you can kind of just dismiss or downplay the regulation. So it's called immune tolerance. And when we have low gut biodiversity, we start to see dysregulation of this immune tolerance. And this can manifest as skin conditions or a variety of other things.
I think that's so cool. And I'm glad you brought up vitamin D because I know that's hugely important for our skin and also for our immunity. And we sort of see something sort of the converse in our skin with things like atopic dermatitis or severe eczema. A lot of times people think they also seem to have food allergies or sensitivities that if they come near strawberries or peanuts, their skin will worsen. And the theory now is that it's not so much that they have a true food allergy, but what happens is their broken skin barrier is exposed to the strawberry peptides or peptides from the protein and in an inappropriate way that it really needs to be introduced to those items through the gut that, like you said, it's doing their surveillance and monitoring. And so when a baby is first introduced to it through the skin, that's when it mounts this immune response. So it's interesting to see how they both work in unique ways, right? For surveillance and kind of protecting our bodies. But again, can sometimes backfire.
That's really interesting. I wasn't aware of that, but that makes perfect sense, right? We've got all this crosstalk going on, and we know that the gut microbes are sending out signaling molecules that are involved in skin homeostasis. And so it makes sense that there's some crosstalk going both ways. Another one that I think of with how the body becomes immune tolerant is, most of your listeners have probably heard this, is to eat local honey to help with seasonal allergies. Now, there's some mixed studies that suggest, maybe it's not that beneficial, but there are some that suggest it is. And that's through your gut. You're not inhaling the honey and putting it in your nasal passages. You're eating it. It's going into the gut. The GI bacteria are then telling the immune cells, this is what's around in your environment. And you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to get so excited and inflamed in response to this. And, with our food systems, one of the things that's happened is we don't eat regionally anymore. We eat food from across the country or all over the world. And I think if our food systems could shift back to smaller farms and eating more locally, because microbiomes are very niche. So my local bio is different than your local biome. And what I'm learning about fermented foods is you really want to get your ferments locally, because some of those things are coming from local produce, the local soil, what's in the air. There's a process called wild fermentation where you're actually just capturing things floating in the air and creating that fermentation process. And you want what's around you to get the most benefit.
That totally makes sense. So lots of good reasons, right? To eat more locally, to eat more seasonally, to maybe look at going back to how we used to do it in the past. And of course, no talk on really anything medical nowadays would be complete without bringing up the GLP-1 agonist, right? Like Ozempic, right? How does that impact the gut? Is it good, bad, neutral? Any impact on that?
So it's early yet. Even though these medicines have actually been around for a while, they're just kind of gaining popularity for the anti-obesity drugs. GLP-1 is actually made in the gut, and the signaling is done by microbes telling our body, make this enzyme or this peptide, and because we're full. We don't need to eat anymore. And so we're seeing dysregulation in that. And people that are heavier or obese seem to have lower levels of this. So their gut bacteria are not sending that signal. So what one study I found showed was that liraglutide, which is one of these GLP-1 agonists, actually shifted the gut microbiome ratio of the two major phyla. So there's two major ones, the Firmicutes and the Bacteroidetes. And we found in most studies that there seems to be a disruption of this ratio in obese mice, in obese people. That's not the whole story. It's a complex biologic system again, but we saw in this one study with the liraglutide that there was a shift back to the leaner gut microbiome profile in these two major phyla. And so that's cool. That seems to be what we want. But the question yet to be answered is, and I think everybody is asking about these drugs, is what happens when you withdraw the drug? Does that shift maintain? Or is the gut then able to make the GLP-1 like it should be making it and telling the body it's full? Or does everything just go back to how it was?
That's like the question, right? Like what happens when people who have been on it stop it, and it's sort of long term what happens. So, well, very cool. Now, I know people listening might say, well, I don't know if my gut's healthy. Like, how do we know if our gut is healthy? Are there any markers or things we can look for? What are some tips for someone to know how healthy your gut is? Because honestly, I think my gut's healthy, but I don't really know.
Yeah, yeah. So there are tests out there that are markers of inflammation, markers of systemic inflammation. There are some that are specific for GI inflammation. And there's a lot of different stool tests where you can mail your poop off and get it analyzed. They're expensive. And I think, and I'm a frugal person, so I want to go with the cheap and easy method. But at this point, I don't think we have enough data to really know what to do with that information. If you did have your stool analyzed, like, what does it mean? Now, what are you going to do? How are you going to change it? So really, the easiest way is, how is your digestion? Are you having regular bowel movements on at least a daily basis? Or are you somebody suffering with chronic diarrhea or constipation? And if you are somebody who feels like your bowels are not regulated, that is a big indicator that your gut is not regulated. Or Are you finding that most of the time you're really gassy and bloated? That's your gut telling you it is not happy. Something is going wrong. So pay attention to your digestion. And it may be something as simple as keeping a food diary for a week and making little notes of, this, I was really gassy 2 hours after I ate this food. And then trying to figure out what you're lacking and maybe looking at that diary and saying, oh, yeah, my fiber intake is pretty terrible, and making those adjustments that way. I, at this point, don't recommend doing a stool analysis. The really cool thing about the microbiome is it's dynamic. And so we can change it. And so if you're not feeling well, having kind of bad digestion or bad digestion at times, and you can pinpoint by tracking what you're eating, you can then make those changes and start feeling better. And then, of course, our skin is the organ that we can see. And so if you're having the rosacea or the psoriasis or some of those things, maybe take that as a signal that it's actually the food you're eating that's the contributing to that. That may not be the whole story, but that might be a major contributor.
Yeah, like same thing with acne. We know some things seem to trigger it, whey protein, high processed foods. So by keeping a food journal and maybe trying to eliminate some of those things, then you probably will see a benefit in your skin. Now, you may need to do other things as well. But yeah, the skin and the gut are super responsive, I feel like, right? Like you can really make changes and relatively, quickly by changing things, by changing what you're eating, by changing how you're taking care of your skin. And there's a clear connection between the skin, your gut, and your brain. And we're really just beginning to understand it. But you have definitely helped clear up a lot of stuff for me, Dr. Coulter. So I really appreciate that. I know people are going to want to find you and follow you. You have a lot of great information out there. What's the best place for people to see what you're up to?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again for having me. I am on YouTube at Katrina C-MD, and I have a lot of videos about food and which foods are healthy and particularly which benefits they convey. And if you want to head over to my website at katrinacoultermd.com, sign up for my newsletter. I actually have a little freebie with different fermented foods around the world so that you can recognize those and hopefully add them into your diet every day and get that beneficial pre, pro, and postbiotic experience.
Yes, I totally need that because I need more than just yogurt and pickles. So,
There's lots of options, lots of condiments out there you would have never guessed.
oh, amazing. All right. Well, I will include all that in the show notes. This has been a lot of fun, Dr. Coulter. I really appreciate you being here, and I'll see everyone next week.